Beauties are going live. Class work there, isn't it? Noswaith dda chi gyd. Good evening, everybody, and welcome along. You are very welcome this evening to the Welsh Rugby Roundup Show, the Dragons Balls, brought to you by the ThreeBod Rugby Group. And tonight we are going to dissect, and I mean we are going to dissect the Welsh performances in Europe this weekend. We're going to talk a little bit about the Welsh women and their tough visit out to France this weekend, and loads of other stuff. But I'll leave you to look forward to that. But I can't do it all by myself. I've got to be joined by a very knowledgeable individual, even though he is an Ospreys fan, so he can't be that knowledgeable. But I'm welcoming in today Brandon. Brandon, how are we doing, buddy?
Yeah, really good. Really looking forward to getting into this weekend. I think this weekend taught us a lot about the state of the Welsh regions, and it's an interesting dynamic, of course, after Wales won the Six Nations, which we haven't had a chance to speak about yet. So it's going to be interesting to get into it. But I hope everyone is well. Good to see lots of people in the comments. Gregor Galway, good evening to you. Hope you're doing well. Freddie Clark, we're going to get into your point for sure. Ian Gilbert from Madrid. Freddie, I'm not wearing the blue shirt again. It's not happening.
I'm asking the same question, Freddie. He had it on just now, but he's changed all of a sudden. He's changed.
Lies, hypocrisy. Never did that. Never did that at all. But good to see everyone in the chat, and Nigel Quigley as well. Good to see you, mate. Hope you're doing well.
Yeah, so like I said, just before we jump in and we start tearing the regions, we're not going to tear them apart because at the end of the day, we love all things to do with rugby in Wales, but certainly a disappointing weekend for the regions. From Brandon's perspective as an Ospreys fan, from mine as a Blues fan, and just as Welsh fans in general. But before we jump into that, we've got a little bit of sad news, but we've got a little bit of a spin on this. So I was put in touch with someone, and they showed me into line with a young man from the rugby community called Jamie Jones, and he's a member of the under-9s team up at Mountain Ash Rugby Club. Unfortunately, he has recently been diagnosed with leukemia, but although it is a bit of sad news, we are looking to make something positive of it. And the club and the local community of Mountain Ash, they've come together again, worked really, really hard during the first lockdown, and completed a 1,000 mile in 10-day challenge raising money for the NHS. But they've come together again, and we're going to try and raise a bit more money for this young man and his battle with leukemia. So they've put themselves a massive challenge. They are going to be attempting, or they're in the middle of, walking, running, cycling, the distance it'll take from Mountain Ash Rugby Club all the way to Johannesburg. And the reason Johannesburg is because that is where the first Lions test will be played in this summer. It's being played down in Johannesburg. An amazing feat if they're going to manage to achieve it. But I looked this afternoon, and they're just under 3,000 miles away from completing that challenge, which is absolutely incredible. They set themselves a target of £10,000 to raise for Jamie, and already they have raised £9,215, which is a superb target that they've smashed already themselves. But to all our watchers tonight and anybody who manages to watch us, we've put a link in the chat now. Any money that you can donate whatsoever, I'm sure that Jamie, his family, and his local community would be extremely grateful for it. And we can get this boy the support that he needs with his battle. So from all of us at the Welsh Rugby Roundup Show and at ThreeBod, we would like to say, Jamie, we wish you all the best with your battle, buddy. Keep strong and keep on fighting. And to all of the community that have come together to tackle this challenge, a massive well done to you. Once you get to that final target of nearly 8,200 miles, I'm sure you'll put your feet up and have a beer to celebrate. But well done, guys. And all the best for the final stages of the challenge from all of us. So with that being said, we're now going to jump in to the weekend's rugby. So unfortunately for me, we're going to start with the London Irish versus Cardiff Blues game. 41 points to 35 in favour of the home side. Myself and Brandon, we watched this game together, and he saw the highs, the lows, and everything in between of my emotions watching that game. Brandon, where did it all go wrong?
I'm not too sure. I was actually very impressed by the Blues to start with. I think we were both very encouraged by how the Blues started, playing some really nice rugby. But We're going to talk more about this as we go through the show and as we dissect each games, but I think the difference in quality between the Premiership and the Pro 14, especially the Welsh regions, was very evident this week, wasn't it? It was very much a situation where the physicality, the experience, the knowledge of how to win these big games just seemed to be missing for the Blues. I was very impressed by, as I said, that opening 20 minutes. But then defensively, some of the players' decisions, I'm not one for calling out specific players because I don't want to do that. But there were some players on the pitch who defensively were all over the place and there were huge gaps. And I think Loader, the winger for London Irish, I think he had about over 100 metres made in the first half alone, which is quite scary to think about. For the Blues, played some nice stuff, but they just seemed really tired at the end. Their physicality, they couldn't deal with it. And London Irish got the job done, down to 13 men at one point as well, which would be really discouraging for the Blues. But what about you? What were your big takeaways from this game as a Blues fan?
Yeah, I think at times, and I watched back through the game afterwards. Obviously, I watched it with my blue tinted glasses on first, and then once I'd had a chance to have a little sit down, we had a little look at the game, and the Blues played some really, really nice stuff. You know, they took some superb opportunities. I think the Josh Adams try had to be the pick of the game with Seb Davis running down the field like a mad Fijian with the ball in one hand. But I think, like you said, it comes down to the fact that the Blues couldn't build a score, couldn't compile any pressure on London Irish because their defence was just all at shambles. Yeah. I mean, at some points, the back inside pass, you know, that's all the Paddy Jackson was doing, was drifting out to the right or to the left. And that inside pass was unlocking so many spaces for the London Irish attack. Like you said, Loader had a really, really good game. The point that you raised was quite an interesting one, was the fact that they went to 14 men first. For you, Brandon, red card, yes or no? I mean, I've had a little look at it. I've looked back at it. At the time when we were watching it, I said that it was a bit harsh. I've looked back at it now, and there is a little drop of the arm. There's not an attempt to wrap. But what was your thoughts on it?
It's such a tough one, isn't it? Because obviously now a ref, when everything happens with the head, they work their way from a red down. They're not thinking, all right, this is a yellow. Am I working my way up? It's always starting out red. Is there a way of working it down? We've seen quite a few incidences this weekend where potentially a red card should have been handed out or a yellow card should have been handed out. For me, it was a red. And that's how I saw it. I thought it was a red. Not enough attempt to wrap the arms. And if you're going to make contact with that area of the body, you're always asking the ref to make a tough decision. And with the way, as we said, the game is going, the way that refs are officiating the games these days, it's always going to be a red card for me. And at that point, I thought the Blues were going to do it. I think both me and you, Jared Evans, then got the drop goal, didn't he? And it was quite interesting. The London Irish head coach afterwards said that he was quite glad that they took the drop goal, because if they'd have taken the penalty, he could have took a minute and a half to take that, and they'd have had about 10 to 15 seconds left to try and win the game. But, you know, hindsight's a beautiful thing, isn't it? But for me, it was a red. But still, the Blues really should have won this one, I think.
Yeah, and like you said, you know, the opportunities were there. For me, that was the next point I was going to say to you is, for me, there seemed to be a real lack of game management towards the end, you know, and which surprised me really, because the Blues have been in this position before. You know, they've played tough European games. They've played really difficult sides going into these last minutes of games. And I think back to the Gloucester win in the final of the Challenge Cup. And the management of that game towards the end was absolutely fantastic. And a lot of the players that are in the side now were players that played in that game. But like you said, Jared Evans taking that drop goal, you've got a penalty advantage. Take it through the phases, kill the clock down until you can get the ball on the tee, take as long as you need, get that conversion over, and then the exit. Not against the drop goal, because at the end of the day, it was a good drop goal and well-taken points. But then from that kickoff then, the Blues, they go through their structures, you know, 1 or 2 phases in the 22, and then Lloyd Williams clears, and he puts the ball straight down the throat of Ollie Hassel-Collins, who, for me, was one of the stars of the game. His ability to break the line was fantastic. And, you know, right at the end then with the try under the post that really killed the contest off. But I think of the games across the weekend, I think that was the one that, well, one of the ones where you feel like the side that lost the game probably should have won it. But, like you said, all the best to London Irish in the next round as they go through to play Bath, which will be a really interesting game. Watched their game a few weeks back, and that was a superb game. We're going to move on to the Ospreys against Newcastle. Now, this game, another one that I watched. Brandon, unfortunately, you were in work, and to be honest, mate, it was a pretty good job. The Ospreys came out so well at the start, and I was really impressed with how they came out at the start of the game. Their intensity, the way that they wanted to play the game is the way they've played all season. They've looked to attack when it's on, and my gosh, did they try and do that in the first 10, 15 minutes, Young Luke Price at 10, he really, really did a job. He had lots of experience around him, the likes of Owen Watkin, George North, Dan Evans, and he was using those players so well. And they went, I think it was 14 points clear at one point.
Yeah.
But as we saw that it started to diminish then as the game went on. I think the first half was very much a clear split into two. I think the Ospreys started really well. They showed lots and lots of promise, and they scored some lovely tries. And then the click. And the Falcons started to turn it on. They turned the intensity up. And it's linked back to what you said just now, Brandon, about there seems to be a real gulf in the way that the Premiership sides play and the intensity the Premiership sides play at, that the Pro 14 sides, especially from the Welsh perspective, just haven't been able to handle this weekend. So looking at that then from that point, the discipline really cost the Ospreys. 2 yellow cards before half-time. For you, Brandon, when a side does that, especially one of your own, but the compiling of errors, it's never, ever going to be something that you can build upon. But when you've got so many experienced heads around, do you think that with those experienced players, the likes of Tipperick, do you really think that things like those sorts of players should have got their arms around and said, look, we need to sort this out now?
Absolutely. That's what they're there for doing. Obviously, they're quality players, but they're so experienced. You think Alan Wynne-Jones, Justin Tipperick, George North, 100 caps, it is massively concerning. But as you said, the Gallagher Premiership sides, they just seem to know how to get the job done. They know, right, we're going to keep the ball. We're just going to go through the phases here. We're more physical than them. So we're just going to power through them. We're going to win a penalty at the breakdown. We're going to kick downfield. We're going to go through the phase again, set up a drive and more, whatever it is. And we saw that across the weekend with other games that they're involved in, like Leicester Tigers, just went back to basics. Just went through the driving maul against Connacht and absolutely obliterated them in that department. And I think for the Welsh regions, the game management has been a massive issue, and it was for the Ospreys and for the Blues, and we'll get to the Dragons and the Scarlets in just a second. But for the Ospreys, I actually thought we'd win this one. Having looked at our team was very strong, but you've got to say we are really missing Stephen Milo at 10. His control of the game is brilliant. I thought Luke Price, of what I've seen, did very, very well. But Milo at 10, his control, his experience, his goal kicking, and then Rhys Webb at 9 as well. We really miss them. Their control of the game, their flow of the game, I think, massive miss for us. I'm not sure when Milo's back fit. I know Webb's out for about another month or so. Obviously, we've got the Rainbow Cup coming up, whatever that means and what the regions will decide to do with that. Will be interesting to see. But disappointing from an Ospreys point of view. But fair play to Newcastle. They grinded out the results, and they'll go on through to the quarterfinals.
Yeah, and I think the thing that impressed me from a Newcastle perspective is that they're not a team that's packed full of these superstar players that you mentioned. They're not, a Wasp side with the players like Paolo Adogwu and players like that. They're not a Bath side full of players like Anthony Watson, Rocco Daguni, Freddie's in the chat. You're looking at players in like Nadolo. They don't seem to be that, but they seem to really join up well together as a team. And I think in the second half in particular, they really, really showed that. But like we said, the Ospreys' discipline massively cost them towards the end, and the penalty count. Well, when we looked at it, when I looked at it, on Saturday, penalty count was never an amount that you really want when you're trying to win a European game. But we were 2 games down, and we were 2 regions out, and I thought we've got 2 regions left to rely on. And I was actually really hopeful going into the Dragons game, the Dragons versus Northampton, but another loss, 43 points to 39. And it was a really good game to watch. I really enjoyed this one as a neutral, but obviously as a Welsh fan, really, really disappointed towards the end. The Dragons came out and they looked to show intent early on. This Northampton side, they've they've had their struggles in the Premiership, but they really seem to have picked themselves up a bit now. Obviously, they were without Dan Biggar, who really has fired that back line for the Northampton Saints so far this season. But the one thing I will say for the Dragons is they took their opportunities really early on. I like the way that Sam Davis is working this back line down at the Dragons. Ashton Hewitt scored a lovely try in the corner from a Jamie Roberts grubber, of all things.
Yeah.
But for me, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this, Brandon, for me, the Dragons are the side out of all of the regions that I thought would have had the best chance going into this due to the continuity of their squad. There was only a few minor changes made to their team because all the way through the Six Nations, they've managed to keep the bulk of their squad. There were some of the internationals were reintroduced. Elliot Dee started, Aaron Wainwright came back into the starting lineup. You had Leon Brown on the bench, but for me, I thought that continuity would have really helped them out. I don't know what your thoughts would have been on that.
Yeah, I thought the Dragons had a really big opportunity here. Again, as Freddie correctly says in the chat, there was a second string Saints side, and it absolutely was. Although, I mean, when you have Naivovo running at you, it's always an interesting challenge to try and stop him because he is ridiculously big, powerful, and quick. For the Dragons, I thought they played some lovely stuff throughout the day, and I think they got a try about 10 minutes from time, maybe 11 minutes from time. And I think they were about 15 points up, weren't they? And then they got a yellow, and then Saints got one back. And obviously they got that try at the end to win the match. It's just really disappointing because you felt like they were going to do it. You thought, okay, the Dragons are going to go through here. The Dragons are going to fly the flag for Wales, which would have been really, really encouraging. And I think, as Jamie Phillips says there in the chat, if I just bring that comment up, Dragons really should have beaten Saints, but still lots of positive take from that game. Dragons making strides under Dean Ryan. I absolutely agree with that. I think Dean Ryan has come in. They've got a good core to that team. Jamie Roberts, Sam Davis at 10. Didn't used to rate him that much at the Ospreys, but I think he's really come into his own down at the Dragons. Hodrie Williams at 9, very experienced, good scrum half. As I said, Jamie Roberts, Ashton Hewitt. And so there's a very strong side there. But I'm not really sure, and we're going to get into it a bit more in a second about the situation with the Welsh regions and the Pro 14. But we just don't seem to be able to close games out. The game management just isn't there. And for Northampton Saints to keep going, keep pushing. They were down to 13 men at one point, and they got a try in that time as well, which is hugely disappointing. Is it a fitness issue? Is it a experience issue? Is it a quality issue? What is it? I don't know. That's why I don't run the Welsh Rugby Union.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with you. I think more so in the Dragons game than the other games. I think in the Blues game, it was always coming. The defence was so far too shaky throughout this game. But I generally thought, looking into that final quarter, the Dragons were in a really good position to win that game. Couple of decisions here, they cost them. I think the Elliot Dee yellow card was extremely costly. Harsh, in my opinion, but as we see nowadays, it's a lot of this compiling of errors. Referees give a first warning, they give a second warning, and then it's a team warning, whereas next player that offends is going to the bin. And unfortunately, that was Elliot Dee in that case. And that was just going into the 70th minute. So it meant that the rest of the game would have been played with just 14 men. And Northampton Saints really took their chances. That the line breaks that they were making, I think the Dragons would be really disappointed because, especially towards the tail end of the season, they really seem to have improved. I watched them when they played against Ulster, and I think they played really well against Ulster for large chunks. They played superbly well against Glasgow, and there was at one point where they were actually close to being considered for fourth place if they'd have won by a certain amount of points. But they looked to be doing it at one point. And I certainly think that the Dragons are in a good place at the minute. Like you said, those old heads like Jamie Roberts, they really seem to have pulled this Dragon side forward. And with the likes of the Stardust, the Elliot Dees, the Aaron Wainwrights, the Ross Moriarty coming back to full fitness now, I think next season now they really need to push on and to start pushing forward. But once we get to the end of the Scarlets game, we are going to mention the bigger issue with Welsh Rugby. But let's finish it up with, and it had to happen, didn't it? We'd lost 3 games. We were relying on the Scarlets to bring a little bit of joy, and they got absolutely hammered. 57 points to 14 against the Sale Sharks. And going into this game, I think the pundits, I was watching the game live, and Chris Ashton was part of the comms team for BT Sport. And he said that the Sales Sharks are going to use this as a learning curve. They've never been at this, well, they haven't been at this stage since, I think, 2006, I was looking. They hadn't been at that stage of the competition since 2006. And it was a great opportunity for them to learn. Well, my God, did they learn on the job. That first 20 minutes, I think it was a mixture of two things for me. The intensity that the Sale came out to play with, mixed with an awful amount of errors on the Scarlets' behalf. Knock-ons, the silly little penalties at the breakdown, sealing off, and literally by sort of 20 minutes, when they're 20 points down, there's no, like Nigel said, Scarlets were awful. There was, and I think by 25 minutes, I think I knew the result of the game by then. The Scarlets seemed to panic so much, and that was something that really surprised me, that considering the rugby they were playing a few seasons back, I thought that, right, that's a kick up the backside they needed. But we talked about this when we did the Blues game. Are the Welsh regions guilty, do you think, Brandon, sometimes of overplaying things, of trying to match the intensity of the sides they're playing against and try and play the ball too much? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, just quickly before I get to that, I absolutely agree with that first 20 minutes that you said there. It seemed like they were shell-shocked. I don't know if you saw Ken Owens' interview after the match. He was completely shell-shocked. He was so, like, he was not surprised, but you could see that he was like, I can't believe just what's happened, because they got absolutely battered. But on playing too much, the Scarlets play the best brand of rugby from the Welsh regions. There's no denying that. They've historically done that. We've seen that with Pivac. But sometimes I hate to see it, but sometimes you've got to do a bit of kick tennis, or you've got to go through the forwards, just go through the phases, just pick and go, or you just kick for territory, or you try a high ball, or whatever it is. You've got to learn to play in the right areas of the pitch. That's one thing I think the Irish provinces thrive at, is knowing where to play all the time, especially Leinster. I mean, with Sexton's boots as well. They know where to play in the right areas of the pitch. We don't seem to have that know-how, or we don't have the capability of players to be able to put us in the right areas of the pitch. Because if you look at our 10s who are all starting across the weekend, they're not all great with the ball on their boots, are they, to be honest? I mean, Jared Evans for the Blues, really exciting going forward. Question marks defensively, but game management isn't there. Luke Price, again, is very, very young, but a very good player, but he's very young. Dan Jones, is it, at the Scarlets, started that one. And then for the Dragons, then Sam Davis, really good player, but not quite the level of those he was playing against. So we don't have those players who are going to put us in the right areas of the pitch. So the know-how of what to do at the right times. But then you've got to ask question marks of the experienced heads. Ken Owens for the Scarlets, Jake Ball, and we'll get to what he did in the game in just a second on Faf de Klerk, because he's a very lucky boy. But those experienced heads who've been on Lions tours, who have won Grand Slams, who have won the Pro 14, who have pushed all the way towards a Champions Cup trophy, should have the know-how to say, right, lads, keep it simple, go through the phases. But again, what's coming from upstairs? What is the management telling you? I'm not too sure. So it was an awful game for the Scarlets. And I said before we came on air, I said it reminded me of when I was back playing in like under 10s and you were losing by 50 points at half time. The ref said, scrap the game. It's not fair.
Yeah, I got to agree massively. The one thing I will say is that, yes, the Scarlets do play this lovely brand of rugby when it works. But one thing I was always taught at lower level of rugby, even when I was playing, is you earn the right to play wide. And yesterday, the Scarlets had no clue with that. I think Jake Ball touched the ball maybe twice in the first half. And you're not going to get any go forward whatsoever. So you're trying to get those defenders sucked in, to get them into thinking that you're going to, play this narrow game. And then you exploit the wide outside players. You've got Liam Williams and Lee Halfpenny in the back line, for goodness sake. Those players know exactly what to do, but you can't expect them to do it against a fully set defensive line. So I think, but we'll go on to the Jake Ball incident. For me, I'm gobsmacked they didn't go to the TMO on that. I remember watching it at the time and thinking, that's Jake Ball getting his own back on Faf from the 2019 World Cup, the famous image of the two of them squared up. And Ashton said a really funny comment on commentary about 10 minutes beforehand, because Faf de Klerk was involved in a little scrap. And he said that when they interviewed him and said, why are you like this? Why are you so abrasive with all the big forwards? And he said, because the game has come forward that much now that they can't do anything to me. They can't hit me. They can't do anything off the ball. But then, my gosh, did Jake Ball catch him? Did you think that should have been a sanction?
I mean, Freddie's just put in the chat there, has he Ball been cited? I'm not too sure if anything's been said about that yet, but I'll be very surprised if something doesn't come out over the next couple of days. He's a very lucky boy to have been on the pitch. I mean, if you got a little scrum half, a South African scrum half yapping in your ear all game, I'm sure that can get pretty annoying because that's all scrum half seems to do is yap in games. But he's very, very lucky, and it's really reckless, and he's obviously got annoyed and done something so stupid. And although we can laugh about it and things like that, I think you've got to say that is stupidly dangerous to do that kind of thing. He could really have hurt Faf de Klerk, and I would be really, really annoyed if that happened to my team. And why the TMO didn't go and look at it compared to some of the red cards we saw over the weekend, I mean, is beyond me. So I think the Scarlets were lucky to have a man on, but it's good that they had a man on because they could have lost by more. So
definitely
good that they had a man on. But before we move on, Sales Sharks, got to give credit to them. Again, that intensity, that power, that South African power that they've got behind them, you've got to say they've been absolutely brilliant. And they'll be very, very difficult to stop in the next round. But yeah, all 4 Welsh regions out of Europe, and it brings a lot of questions to the fore.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking just before we came on now, and I think the Welsh regions are in a really tricky position here. We look at, and naturally, we're going to compare it to the Gallagher Premiership simply down to the fact that all 4 regions lost against Premiership sides. For me, if you look at those Gallagher Premiership sides we played against, of the exception of maybe 2 or 3, they don't lose a great deal of players during these international breaks. And if you look at this season in particular, you would have had, prior to the Autumn Nations Cup, you would have had players finishing off the Six Nations. So they'd have had those final round of games. Then they're in camp for the Autumn Nations Cup. They come out just before the European Games around the December period. Then before you know it, end of January, they're back in camp ready for the Six Nations. So if you're looking, I was reading stats of some of the top players in Wales playing maybe 2 or 3 games for their regions this year. And we're not calling players out because that's the management of the players, not the players' decisions in most cases. But when you look at a team like London Irish, who from looking, and we said this when we did the watch along, London Irish haven't lost a player to the Six Nations this year. So their side has been building all season, and the continuity was there. And I think we've got to say, in all 4 regions' cases, we were, at some points, we genuinely looked like teams that hadn't played together before. Yeah. There was so many disjointed little errors across all of the games. And you've got to say, apart from the Dragons, I've got to say, because the Dragons, like we mentioned when we did the review, the Dragons have only lost maybe 3 or 4 players to the Welsh setup, but they've still got a real crux of good quality players. Yeah. Whereas, and speaking from my perspective and looking at you, Brandon, with the side that went out to Leinster, we looked at the side of the Ospreys that went out to Leinster, and we thought originally we're in all sorts of bother here. But I'm cautious of moving forward, because I think the only reason, and you can see it in the chat, people saying it, they're going to throw money at this, and the regions would love to have more funding, but at the end of the day, it's the recruitment of the players that you're bringing in. You look at the Blues this season. They were able to bring back Josh Adams. They were able to bring back Hallam Amos. As well as that, they've managed to get the names of Josh Navidi. These Welsh international players, which is fantastic because they really do make a difference in sides. My question is with the recruitment policy now, should the region start looking at good quality players that are going to be there throughout the championship? I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Brandon, but for me, I think they've got to start recruiting a lot more smartly.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. We're seeing so many players heading over to Wales. I mean, you must remember back in 2008 when we won the Grand Slam and 13 Ospreys were named, I think it was, in that game away at Twickenham. It's a massive issue. It's a massive issue here in Wales. Players going to the Wales camp. And we spoke, you mentioned it just before we went live, that Josh Adams played 3 games for the Blues this season. I mean, that's ridiculous. And to think of the wage that he's going to be on, it is crazy to think about. And if a player picks up an injury during that time, he may play 1 game all season. It's brilliant to see these youngsters coming through. But what you have to think about is the impact when COVID goes, the impact that's going to have on people who are going to go to the ground. Do people want to go and watch a losing side? No, they want to go watch a successful side. That's why the Irish provinces, yes, there's a lot of history around the provinces and the regions, and I don't want to get into all that. But that's why people go watch the Irish provinces, because they're successful. In both Conference A, Conference B, Conference A, Leinster and Ulster finished first and second. Conference B, Munster and Connacht finished first and second again. And there's a massive divide in quality. And it's because it seems like in Ireland, there's this mindset, okay, everything is for the national team, but we have a massive depth behind us and the quality coming through is good enough. I don't think the quality coming through right now, it may be good enough, but it doesn't have the platform. And we'll get into a bit later about grassroots and the issues for players not being able to play. But the youngsters now, they're being thrown in. Yes, we won it away at Leinster, which was amazing. And I went absolutely crazy on my channel, on my watch along. It was great as an Ospreys fan. But that's a 1 in a million. That's very unlikely to happen again anytime soon with the team we put out. Although Leinster had a very young team as well. So do these young players really have a chance to develop? Because if they're playing against the quality that they're playing, so Leinster could put, most weekends, Leinster could put out a 2nd or 3rd team and they'd probably beat most teams in the league quite comfortably. So it's great seeing that loads of these players are coming back to Wales. We're seeing Will Rowland's coming back, Thomas Francis, Rhys Priestland's coming back, lots of players coming back. But I think we need to follow the example of like the likes of the Blues a bit more. Ray Lilo, for me, has been an absolute hero for the Blues for many years. Fantastic player. Those defending was a little bit questionable on Friday night. But you've got to say that we need to start looking at that more. I know the Ospreys are linked with a guy from the Crusaders. That's gone a little bit quiet over the past few days. So I think it is something that the regions need to look more at. Quickly, before we crack on with our next section, we'll look through some of your comments because there's a lot of comments coming through. Do apologise we haven't got through them yet. LouTube's in the chat. Hi, LouTube. Hope you are doing well. Rugby Geeks is in the chat as well. Hope you're doing well. Joe asked, Joe, who heads up the ThreeBod Rugby Group, does amazing work for all of us. Thank you so much, Joe, for everything that you do. Can you see the Dragons becoming the leading Welsh region? Quickly, in 10 seconds, Ben, what do you think about that? For me, no.
For me, they've got the building blocks in place, mate, and it's only a matter of time before it clicks. Whether it's going to be a year, 2 years, Dean Ryan seems to be the man to do it. But yeah, I think they've got all the ingredients there to do it.
Yeah, I'm not too sure, but we'll have to wait and see. I hope not as an Ospreys fan, but I do want all the Welsh regions to do well. On the Irish provinces, then, compared to the Welsh provinces, the coaching system in the Irish provinces are a good system. That's another reason why the Irish sides do well in the Pro 14. Let's see if we can see some or any more comments. This is a very good point. Talent seems to be coming through, but is there a disconnect from the clubs? Historically, potentially, yes, but we won't get into that too much.
Sorry, Brandon. There's one I want to bring up is Rugby Geek's comment where he said, don't bring in people, spend the money building up, spend the money on the Welsh Prem. And I think he's right to an extent. I think we need to start spending. And as Freddie has said throughout, is that if you look at the Premiership, they've got so much strength in depth. They've got players coming through academy systems. And we need to start building from the ground up. And for me, the Welsh Premiership, and we'll get onto that in just a bit, but I think the Welsh Premiership needs to take a far more important role in the development of Welsh rugby from the club level. If you look at it from an Irish provincial level, there's so much going on behind the scenes of the provinces that contributes to the success of their sides. For us, it seems that there's not a lot behind the regions. And I think that it's come ever since the regions turned into regions. I don't think in some instances they have been fully supported. But again, that's something we'll get into at another time because we could talk for hours and hours upon that. So thank you for all your comments, guys, and keep them coming as we keep going, and we'll try and get through as many as we can. But here at the Welsh Rugby Roundup Show, we love to cover all aspects of Welsh rugby. And it was a big weekend, obviously, for the Welsh women, going into their first game under new coach Warren Abrahams. It was a tough ask to go out to France in the opening game, and they really had a tough evening out in Paris. A 13-minute hat-trick from Caroline Boujard, I'm going to say. And that was really it was a difficult night for the Welsh girls. You know, the 8 unanswered tries, not a point on the board. I think in the second half, from my perspective, the Welsh women seemed to show a lot more resilience. They started to show a lot more in terms of their grit and their determination, and they really started to slow that French side down in the second half. But, you know, the French side just continued to build. They have an enormous pack and so many amazing talents in that French side. Agathe Sochat. We cover the French side, and I wish I could speak French. If we almost had Eddie Butler on the show, it'd be great. But yeah, the dominance the players like that had at the breakdown. And then, obviously, towards the end of the game, then finishing off with a try from fullback Emile Bouliard. And that ended what was a really, really difficult night for the Welsh ladies. Massive congratulations, though, from a Welsh perspective to Flo Williams, Donna Rose, and Jess Roberts, all picking up their first caps. And Brandon, and this is what we're going to go into next, but you spoke recently with Warren Abrahams. Is this something he's looking to do, bring in new players and sort of develop the side over the time that he spends in the role?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a privilege to chat with the current Wales women's head coach, Warren Abrahams, recently. It's on the Facebook page if you want to go check it out. Do check it out. It's a 45-minute interview with him about his life and how he came to be the current women's head coach. And he spoke about the legacy he'd like to leave with Welsh rugby and with the women's game here in Wales. He spoke about the challenges, and this is the big challenge. A lot of these girls play in England professionally. Some of them don't. But the Wales squad itself, the Welsh camp itself, is not professional. The France one is semi-professional. Nearly all of them are professional. And so the resources that they have, I'm not saying Warren Abrahams is not a great coach, because absolutely is, having spoke to him, but what he has available at his disposal compared to France is always going to be very, very difficult to compare. So yes, I had the privilege of chatting with him. We're going to share a clip from that interview now. And he is going to chat a little bit about his hopes for the Six Nations. This was recorded before the France game, so do take that into context. But I hope you enjoy this short clip from the interview. Six Nations. We got Women's Six Nations start of April. 2 questions for you in one, really. How happy are you that the tournament is going ahead? And also, it's not going to be taking place while the male Six Nations is taking place. So it will have pretty much nothing to compete with it. Is that a good thing for the women's game, do you think? Is this a great opportunity for the women's game really to showcase what it can do?
Yeah, so probably your first question there is, again, we just spoke about lockdown and how bleak it was in lockdown, and when we couldn't see things. Now we've got an opportunity, and we said this to the team the other day, we've got now something to work towards. You know, the 3rd of April, we're playing the French in the Six Nations, so we've now got something to work towards, which, as you can imagine, just fuels the excitement by itself for the squad, because now there's actually something there at the end that we can build towards. So from that point of view, it's really important for us. We know what we're working towards, and our focus is 100% on this particular game. And then the game standing by itself or on its own 2 legs, I think is brilliant for the women's game, because you know it's the fastest growing sport in the world. The Allianz Premiership is doing some incredible stuff. I just see a thing where they've now doubled the salary cap as well. So it gives us a different level of exposure. You look at the England-France game recently that was played in the autumns. You look at the number of people that watched that particular game. It was a significant high number, because there was nothing, although we were in lockdown, but there was nothing else happening. So again, history suggests that this could be a pretty great opportunity. You look at the women's football and you look at the numbers that people are watching, because it's something different. It brings a different flavor. The game is looking slightly different, but it also gives people now the opportunity to not to compare and contrast, because sometimes we watch the men's game and then the women play afterwards, and emotionally we're so invested in how the men's game look, and we expect the game to look exactly the same, but there's 30 people there on the field that is actually that is female, number one, so they've got a different makeup. Although we're playing the same game, but the game's going to look slightly different, and I think that is exciting. And the other part to it also gives these girls that individual profile opportunity. So now it's like anything, if I want to go, let's say you've got one of the Welsh girls playing on a Saturday, and you watch someone who's not Welsh, or just out of interest flicking the TV on, you look at the first name, someone has done something incredible, scored a brilliant try. Next thing you're on Google, your phone's there, bam, and it's searching who this particular person is, and it will just grow. I think it will grow the individual profiles of our female players. It will grow the game, but it's also a great opportunity for the women's game as a whole, for the Six Nations to really go. We want to continue growing the game. We want to take it to a new level. So you've got an opportunity here now. So the guys has got an opportunity to really push and grow it, and then we can actually action these things that we say we want to do, versus being reactive based on what's happening in the men's game. So no, it's a fascinating opportunity and fascinating time to be a female athlete. So you've got a Olympic year, you've got a Rugby World Cup year. It doesn't get any better than that.
There we go. That was our chat earlier with Warren Abrams, and the full interview is available on the Facebook page, on the ThreeBod Rugby Group Facebook page, if you want to hear more from Warren, and you want to see me for 45 minutes more, then you can see me there. But he's a really great guy, and I'm sure he's going to be fantastic for the women's, and they face Ireland next weekend, and hopefully able to turn things around in that match.
Yeah, definitely, mate. And I think from that, I think Warren was such a humble guy. He's come from humble beginnings. He's built himself up to the level that he's at now. And I think, from my perspective, if I was a player under his coaching, I think I would definitely feel inspired by him, because he believes anything can happen. And I think anything can happen. The way that the Welsh women's game is improving. We've got the Women's World 15 tournament that's been, the World Rugby have put a lot of money into, starting in 2023. Like we said, hopefully the Women's World Cup goes ahead. I think it may be postponed, but the Women's World Cup should still go ahead at some point. So lots of stuff to look forward to with that. But now to move on to something that we're going to start building back towards. Welsh women's rugby is here now. But Brandon, you're going to lead us in the pathway to participation post that the WRU have put out, and how our youngsters and our grassroots level are going to get back to playing.
Absolutely. So recently, the Welsh Rugby Union announced their pathway to participation. So this is to make sure that it is safe to return to rugby. So finally, we have some news. So we're going to go through it quickly, and then we have a short clip to share with you about the Welsh Premiership as well. So from April the 1st, so this has recently just happened, return to tag and tucked fixtures for under 18s teams. And I think this is really important for youngsters involved in the game. I think it'll be interesting in a few years to see where Welsh rugby is at with players coming through, because have we missed a year group of players coming through? That's the question, isn't it? Have we missed that? And we hope not, and we hope people will come back to the game. But it's good to see that is seeming to be returning. From May the 1st, all teams, including youth and senior, male and female, permitted to return to modified contact training, so no scrums for at least 6 weeks prior to games. So that's really going to be a mini pre-season. And I think people will enjoy playing in the summer a little bit more than playing in the winter. Being a winger in really cold North Wales in January, screaming for the ball and no one's listening to you, is not enjoyable. So I'd rather do that in the sun in June and July. Heading into mid-June, then the return of competitive content will be at 7 and a 10 aside for all ages. So that's just really to keep the numbers down. Mid-July, then friendly 15-a-side matches are going to be agreed set to modified laws. We'll have to wait and see what those laws are when they come in. Then into August, between August and November of this year, return of 15-a-side Welsh Rugby Union competitions at all levels, possibly in knockout format. So hopefully seeing some form of competitive rugby, really, but they may be separate competitions to your normal leagues that you tend to see. Between December and January, a winter break, and then hopefully for January next year, so 9 months away, every single league will be back playing normally. That is the hope of the Welsh Rugby Union. It's good to have some news about how they're looking to do that. It gives hopes for local clubs. So hopefully it won't be too long before we're seeing local rugby clubs full once again.
Yeah, absolutely. And like what Freddie just dropped into the chat now, it's really good that for players that we've been given this roadmap out of lockdown and back to playing rugby, because from my perspective, I'm a primary school teacher by day. And a lot of the children in my class in years above, they've been without rugby for nearly 2 years now. So it's one of those things that they need back. Is that you talk about that social element, you talk about just a well-being element, in terms of fitness and mental well-being. And rugby is a great game to do that, meeting new friends. I think it's really, really important that we do get this roadmap, and fingers crossed the WRU in line with the Welsh government, we can so hopefully meet this map out of lockdown and get back to rugby. Because like you said, Brandon, it's good to be back playing, even if it means playing in the summer, which for me was always one of those things. We always play in the cold, the wet, the mud, and then come the summer when it's absolutely lush, we just chilling, watching watching summer tours on telly. So I think it'll be great, and I think there's so many people that are so hungry for the game to come back. But obviously linked in with that, this will obviously impact the guys down at the Welsh Premiership. Now, we've talked a little bit about the importance of the Welsh Premiership tonight. We've talked about where the place of the Welsh Premiership has in terms of developing these regional sides in Wales. We're not going to go into that too much now, but Brandon, you spoke to the guys over at the Welsh Premiership podcast recently. What were we chatting about there?
Yeah, I had a chat with the guys, as Ben said, from the Welsh Premiership podcast. They have a fantastic podcast. While we play this clip, and we will drop a link to their socials in the chat, so do be sure to head over there and say hello and follow their pages. We had a really good chat about the hopes for return of play, the impact that there's been on the Premiership and the players involved. So I spoke with Hayden from the Welsh Premiership podcast on everything to do with the situation regarding the Welsh Premiership. I'm saying Welsh Premiership way too much, so I'm just going to play the clip. But I hope you enjoy this one, and I'll drop the links to their socials in the chat while we play this. To the season, what was the decision made ahead of the 2020-21 season for the Premiership?
So for the 2020-21 season, it's basically wanted to get people back in, but I think some clubs did get back in for maybe 4, 5, maybe 6 weeks. I don't think some clubs didn't even bring the players back in at all because they just didn't know when the start of the season was going to be. And I think the WRU let it play for a few weeks before deciding, all right, it doesn't look like, because we obviously had that second wave of COVID, they said, all right, it doesn't look like we'll be back playing anytime soon. So then they just cancelled the league full stop then. Obviously with no going back into lockdown then as well, just before Christmas. Nobody was able to even train. So since then, really, everyone's just been stuck at home and not able to get out or do anything.
Yeah, it's been very frustrating, isn't it? And we're seeing the Welsh Rugby Union now have come out with their guides to coming back to play. But looking across the season, obviously, you guys have been doing your podcast, which you've been absolutely smashing it. And we'll leave links down in the description for people to go and check out, because it's well worth a listen. But what have been the challenges facing Premiership Rugby over the season? Do you think people have been drawn more maybe to the Pro 14 and leagues like that because there has been no action in the Premiership?
Yeah, well, it's been massive, really, the impact on the clubs, particularly the impact on the players and the supporters. I know a lot of the players have struggled mentally being at home a lot of the time. And that's just from the players I've spoken to. And I know the supporters will be exactly the same. And you think of the older supporters, the ones that are probably not on social media as much, they're probably really isolated without the sort of going to the rugby club on the Saturday afternoon. That's sort of their social gathering. So they'll be really impacted by that. But fair play to some of the clubs. I know when they were allowed to go out when we weren't in lockdown, they sent some of the players out to go and see some of the older supporters and put together care packages and stuff. So fair play to the clubs within the Premiership, because they have really helped the people that may be isolated. But yeah, then obviously the players would have struggled like physically to keep fit, and that'll be a massive thing going back into competitive rugby now. That's why I think the WRU have said that training will be allowed to start from the beginning of next month, and then competitive fixtures will be starting back in August. Whether the Premiership will start back in August or whether the actual league won't start back till January just depends on the COVID rates really and how things keep going.
Well, that was actually going to be my next question for you, was about the resumption of the league. We're both assuming that, of course, the league is not going to happen this season. So for next season, the hope would be that it can get going. Is that the hope within your podcast, obviously, but also within the rugby community?
Yeah, the simple answer is we obviously don't know. And I think a lot of people have sort of slated the WRU for no guidance. But I think the main thing which I would say is we obviously are in a time where none of us know what's going to happen. So, and I don't think the WRU want to say, oh, this is going to happen, that's going to happen, and then have to backtrack on what they said. So it is a difficult time, and obviously we'd all like to see rugby back, and hopefully we see it sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. And quickly before we go, tell us a little bit about your podcast and where people can find a bit more about what you do.
Yeah, so a little bit background on our podcast then. We started it just before the season ended, actually, to do with our uni work. We just thought little weekly sort of roundup on the Prem. And then obviously COVID hit and we had to think of something different to do. So we've just had guests on from the Prem every fortnight, a mix of people. Our most recent guest was Will Jones, the ex-Swansea RFC and Ospreys flanker, ex-Wales under-20s captain as well. And we just spoke about what he's been doing and what his ambitions are now that he's been released by the Ospreys. Yeah, we've spoke to a mix of people. We spoke to Matt Silver recently as well, who's top bloke, and we spoke about his battles with alcoholism and depression as well, which we thought was a really important thing to touch on.
There we go. That was my chat with Hayden from the Welsh Premiership podcast. There's a link to their Twitter feed, so do go and check it out. A really good podcast to have a listen to, and something that's not covered enough in Welsh rugby, but needs a lot more attention. So really worth having a listen to that if you have time.
Yeah, definitely. You know, and fingers crossed with this pathway back. The guys over at the Welsh Premiership podcast, they can start getting back into doing what they do best and covering the rugby, because that's what we all want to see, really. But we are coming towards the end now. We're going to have a little look forward now, obviously. So we are 3 weeks away now, I think, 3 weeks away from the opening fixtures of the Rainbow Cup. Now, still very hazy on how this is going to look longer term, but the opening rounds of fixtures have been announced. So I think the opening round for the Welsh regions, the Blues will be playing the Ospreys down at the Liberty Stadium, and the Dragons will be taking on the Scarlet. I believe it's at Rodney Parade, but don't quote me on that. I'm not too sure on that one. But Brandon, for the regions now, nothing to lose. Players will still want to be putting their hands up for Lions selection. So for you, how do you see this going from a regional perspective, the Rainbow Cup?
I think they've got two options, haven't they? They could either say we're going to treat this like the Anglo-Welsh Cup, where we're just going to throw the youngsters in, we're just going to let them have a go, just see what happens. Or they could really go for this and say, right, we're going to go try and win this. We're going to go for this and see if we can do some damage in this competition. Obviously, the big news is that the Bulls, the Lions, the Stormers and the Sharks are joining the competition from South Africa, and then the other sides in the Pro 14, of course, are playing in there as well. I would like to see the sides go for it, but also have a balance of giving an opportunity for these youngsters to play as well. Again, with the Lions tour coming up, how many of the players who would be thinking they'd be going on the Lions tour would be happy to risk this and say, yeah, that's fine, I'll play in this, which is competition that at the end of the day means nothing, to be honest. It doesn't guarantee you qualification for anything, or it doesn't guarantee you a position in the league or anything like that. So it'll be interesting to see how they approach it. I'd be surprised if the regions really went for it. I think we will see a lot of youngsters being played, but I'd like to see us give it a good shot, and it'll be interesting to see how the South African sides get along as well.
Yeah, and I think for me, you know, we've mentioned that it's going to be a difficult period for the Welsh regions regardless, because either they're going to be losing players to Lion selection, obviously. But for me, the interesting thing, and you talk about the qualification process, and there's nothing really on this tournament other than, you know, the Rainbow Cup, as it were. But it was an interesting article that I was reading the other day in terms of, and don't smile, Brandon, because it makes me sad every time I think about it, but there was a rumour mentioned that the South African sides that are coming into the tournament, obviously they're looking to come across to Europe as a more permanent fixture. They see that their future, and Rassie Erasmus, I think yesterday there was an interview with him saying that he sees the development of South African rugby happening over in Europe, that the Southern Hemisphere no longer provides the level of competition the South African sides need to grow. So understandable that the SRU have put so much, or the SARU, sorry, have put so much money into this move coming across. It's not going to be a cheap move. Just the air miles alone, I can just imagine how much it's going to cost just back and forth in that. But the interest from the article was that the top 2 ranked South African sides from this tournament would actually take 2 of the qualification spots available to Pro 14 sides. So obviously, as things stand, obviously Munster, Leinster, Connacht, and Ulster. My brain went completely blank then. They'd already guaranteed their rugby in Europe months ago. The Scarlets and the Ospreys also securing those slots. Okay, the Scarlets and the Ospreys, 3rd place in both their conferences, quite happily sailing through. The interesting point comes to the Blues, who currently, or what were they currently, they're not going to move anywhere, who are in 4th place in their conference. Now, from my understanding is that, from this article I read, is that the 2 top-ranked South African sides would take the place of the 4th place sides in both Conference A and Conference B, meaning that, of course, the Blues would miss out on European rugby at the top table next season. This is speculation at the moment. We're not saying that this is for definite and this is definitely happening, but a concerning little bit of news, Brandon, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, very concerning. We did a watch-along for the Blues against Edinburgh, a game knowing that the Blues needed to win that one to secure what they thought would secure European rugby for next season. I don't think it's fair to potentially announce such a thing straight after the end of the competition, because the Blues would have thought we've done enough. Obviously, in Conference A, that would affect Glasgow, who finished 4th in Conference A. So I don't think it's very fair that they would potentially do something like that. For me, the South African sides really need to prove themselves and need to go through a league season and then qualify for it. I still have massive hesitations about these South African teams being in the Pro 14 and being in the Champions and Challenge Cup in general, and CVC buying stakes and such a thing. And I'm convinced within 10 years we're going to see South Africa as part of the Six Nations. I'm convinced that can happen. I think it's going to happen. I don't want it to happen, but I think it's going to happen. So it's not fair on the Blues. As an Ospreys fan, I like taking the mick out of you. I like taking the piss. But I would like to see all the Welsh regions in Europe, and I think it's a good thing for Welsh rugby. Let's hope we have a better showing next year. But it's important for the Welsh game to have all of our regions playing in some form of European rugby. So I'd be very, very frustrated if this happened.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the South African sides coming in will only increase the quality, you'd hope. And that's something that we're going to chat about in shows later on in the year when we come to sort of the end of the season as it were. When we come to sort of June's show, myself and Brandon, we're going to go through the regions one at a time and talk about how the season has gone. Obviously, once we know a little bit more about how the regions are doing in the Rainbow Cup. But we are going to have a little look into how that's impacted them, how they've done in the tournament, and how they're going to look going forward. But we've come to the end of our show for this month, guys, okay? I'm going to hand you over to Brandon now for some important messages, and then back to me just to say good evening to you all.
Yes, indeed. A really exciting week coming up on the ThreeBod rugby group. First of all, thank you for joining us this evening. I hope you have enjoyed. Thank you for getting involved in the chat as well. So a few things for you to keep your eyes out on over the week. Tuesday and Thursday, there's going to be a live at 5, which is short, about 20 minutes or less, with Big Joe Shep hosting that. He'll have a guest alongside him. And this week, Tuesday at 5 o'clock, they're going to be discussing whether the 2021 Women's Rugby World Cup was cancelled, yet the HSBC Sevens series is going ahead. And then on Thursday at the same time, 5 o'clock, going to be chatting with former USA Eagle and World Rugby commentator Dallin Stanford, and an overview of Major League Rugby and why it's been such a positive hit out in the USA and all over the world as well, as it's a really exciting league. Also, on Wednesday nights, we have the New England Free Jacks show at 7 o'clock, Let's Ride series that will be hosted by Dallin Stanford. And then we have a very busy weekend in terms of Champions Cup rugby, and there will be a Gogglebod, a watch along as such. If you're on my channel, you'll know that I do a lot of these, but it's going to be Exeter versus Leinster and also Northampton Saints versus Ulster on the ThreeBod Facebook page, and also on the YouTube channel. So do join us for all of them. A lot of information, but make sure you like and follow the Facebook page and you subscribe to on the channel to make sure you're updated on all of them things.
Yeah, and just after having a weekend of stuffing our faces full of Easter eggs and chocolate, we've now got a weekend full of rugby. There's so much rugby coming at you guys. Definitely give us a follow here at the Welsh Rugby Roundup Show. Give the ThreeBod a follow as well, because the content is coming at you thick and fast, guys. And with so much coming up, we've got the Rainbow Cup, we've got the Lions Tour, we've got the potential Welsh Summer Tour. Oh, so much rugby coming up, and we can't wait to chew it all through with you all. But that is it for us tonight. So a big thanks to Brandon for joining us this evening, and we've loved having you on. See you all, guys, for the next one. Noswaith dda. Good night.